Oh, there we go.
Okay. So I'll call the June 25th, 2020 Town of Northwood Planning Board meeting to order at 7:05. Present, Chair Bob Strobel. Members Joe McCaffrey, Lee Baldwin.
Bob, do it by roll call, please.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please.
Announce yourself.
Hal Kreider.
Lee
Betty
Baldwin.
Smith.
Joe McCaffrey.
Okay.
Thank you.
And voting designation is all members present. We also have Susan Austin, James Burdine, and Linda Smith present from town. So how do we want to work the update on procedures? Or do we?
There we go. Bob, do you mean meeting procedures?
Yes. Well, I can tell you that on Tuesday's Select Board meeting, the Board of Selectmen did authorize town boards and committees to use, and I'm going to paraphrase, not the exact motion of the language or words of the language, to use the town hall meeting space for their own meetings, provided they meet CDC guidelines and work with Town Administrator Joe Scruton to meet whatever local requirements we have. In our case, we also have requirements from SRPC for James to attend a meeting in person if need be. That being Tuesday, this being Thursday, I have not had a chance to work on process of how we actually want to run the meetings for tonight's meeting, but the discussion held by the Board of Selectmen was, I found, pretty informative, because obviously Joe Scruton, interim town administrator, has given it the process some thought. As far as, public flow of the public, access to bathrooms, sanitization, cleaning, various other things. The one addendum to, or part of the motion was, I believe, and Hal, correct me if you need to, that a streaming option for meetings should be available for all members. That does not necessarily, and I interpreted this from, I think Mr. Fry, Selectman Fry made that, that does not necessarily mean a two-way communication.
That's correct.
It is just that similar to what's happening now live on YouTube.
Exactly.
Members of the public can watch. They would still need to submit commentary through our process, either town staff or email, or if we allow public testimony live in person, we can do that as well. That being said, we still have details to figure out on how we can run our meetings. We are authorized to do so, provided we can meet those 6 foot, essentially the summary of social distancing of 6 feet. No more. I think I seem to recall James chip in that the no meetings of no more than 10 people, that has expired, but I couldn't swear to that.
So we were talking about that at SRPC at our staff meeting earlier this week. The legal limit of no more than 10 people that Governor Sununu put into place has expired.
Okay.
So there is no longer a legal requirement to cap at 10. Bob Young sent me a memo that he was working on earlier today, trying to arrive at a capacity threshold for the meeting room,
Okay.
using safe social distancing.
Yep.
So I think that it seems like there are sort of a few different pieces right now that we need to pull into, one unified sort of policy and procedure going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's you, Bob, and me, and Bob Young and John Scruton just getting on a meeting and figuring out some of the details and how these things are going to work together or what have you. It seems like, so technically, according to the state, we can have more than 10 people in that room. The limitation on how many people we can actually have in that room, though, is sort of dependent on the geometry of the room and the people and the moving bubbles and all of that. And what Bob sent me was sort of acknowledging that if you only have to have 6 feet between people, you can fit more in, but that doesn't leave room for somebody to, for example, walk between 2 other people without violating that distance.
Right.
So I think there's still work to be done in terms of both the seating arrangement and the flow of people through the room.
James, excuse me, could I also add to that the consideration, I don't want people to forget this, in terms of the logistics. We're trying to limit the exposure of the employees and staff at town also. So like, for example, Susan, we wouldn't necessarily want her in the room if she can, via whatever is the live stream, track it that way. Linda might be a different story because we need some interaction. I don't know, but we really need to take that into consideration. We need to be very careful with our employees.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Some of the other considerations, I had suggested to Bob Young the possibility of potentially having a one-way flow of traffic like a lot of grocery stores are doing. So if an applicant or a member of the public wanted to speak, potentially entering by the front door, coming to a microphone, and then exiting via the double doors in the meeting room straight to outside. I think an email from one of you, Bob Scrabble, it might have been you, said that issues of ADA accessibility came up that way,
Yes.
and that it wouldn't necessarily be possible, for somebody needing accessibility accommodations to be able to follow that direction.
I think we could I think we could get around that though, if need be, but just by making an exception to the one way, but I don't want to take up meeting time for that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I think something else that we would need to consider then, if we are working with an effective capacity of, I think even if we assume our cap isn't 10 people legally anymore, our de facto cap is probably going to be somewhere in the 15-ish people range anyway. So at that point, I think why even sort of risk the extra couple people? I think essentially what we would be looking at is the people who would be allowed in the room would be something along the lines of the board members, whatever staff is required to be physically present, and the applicant. And then relying on some sort of broadcast to outside the building and people being able to watch the live stream. to know when, if we can cycle through one at a time, people to address the board, when to line up outside the front door and be let in. So I think the details of how people will address the board and get their comments into the record are sort of the next issue.
Can I ask
To
you,
that, yeah.
has any thought been given to holding planning board meetings at another location that is larger? And has
We,
one more thing, any thought been given to, given that we've got a backlog of several applications, any thought given to having more meetings as opposed to a 3-4 hour meeting in a relatively
Yeah.
limited space?
so we briefly discussed sort of at the beginning of all of this, whether there would be another space that could accommodate us. And we sort of let that drop during the Zoom calls because we had this platform that we were allowed and able to use. I don't know that we have brought that back up as a possibility. I would sort of defer to actual town staff to know whether, for example, meeting in the school would be possible. But one of the difficulties that we talked about the last time we brought this up was that a lot of those other facilities, whether it's Co-Brown, whether it's a church, whether it's the elementary school, if they're not open to their own people right now, it's highly unlikely that they would be willing to allow an outside meeting to take place in their facility. So we can always ask, but I wouldn't be holding my breath.
Yeah.
As far as scheduling other meetings, that is something that we talked about at the last meeting. And that's something that I'm hoping we are going to be very explicit about tonight as to whether we are willing to schedule an extra meeting to catch up on some of these things and to notice them. Because, you know, the point that you brought up alongside that is a good one, that the longer, you know, it's not just distance, it's also how long you are spending, you know, exposed to other people.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So it's, I think, in everybody's interest from a safety standpoint to try and streamline how we conduct business and be as efficient as possible.
And just for the record, I'll interject here. Victoria Parmalee is added to the meeting and the voting designation.
And who is Galaxy Note 9, please?
That's probably me, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Can't be positive because I don't know who else might be in possession of one of those.
Okay. And then we have one other phone number, 422-4307.
Yep, that's me,
Okay,
Linda.
okay.
Yeah, my internet dropped for some
Okay.
reason. It's acting up for 3 days, on and off.
I know Tim occasionally calls in and I don't want to miss him if he does join us, so.
Just to say about the Galaxy Note 9 entry there, I'm not sure I signed in with my name, but I guess it didn't work
Well,
out that way.
you're in as Joe McCaffrey. You're also, it sounds like you're in as Galaxy Note 9, so.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of the other things to consider will be whether we continue to use some sort of teleconferencing for two-way access by board members in addition to the people who are physically present.
Not sure what you mean by that, James. Can you explain?
Yeah, so under normal 91A, it's still possible for, under emergency circumstances, for a board member who is not physically present to join electronically and count towards quorum. Yeah, I only got a handful of email responses, and I don't need anybody to, identify themselves right now, but if any board members, for whatever reason, didn't feel comfortable attending in person, whether due to membership in a high-risk group or any other reason, there could be logistical ways to involve them and still have them count towards quorum if they can't be physically present. But we'd have sort of extra things to figure out then. Where was I going next? I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
We're going to list off your proposed procedure, I think.
So honestly, I feel like we need that extra round with John and Bob to have something that everybody at town feels comfortable with. But I think in terms of overall principles, I think probably an expectation that certainly no more than one applicant is going to be in the room at a time. So everybody else should be waiting outside or in their cars or wherever they're comfortable.
Sure, I think that makes good sense.
Yep. I think the commitment to follow CDC guidelines and all of that means a requirement for everybody that's in the room to be wearing masks. I think the 6 foot or more spacing is a given, and that's something that we'll need to follow up with John and Bob to figure out the details of how we are going to do that. I think I saw suggested somewhere the addition of plastic sheeting or something as well to have physical barriers and separation. It sounds like opening the windows is going to be possible in that space, so we'll get some extra airflow. But then I think for people to address the board, one, I think we really need to encourage people to submit comments in writing beforehand. We don't want to take away people's right to speak and address the board, but I think we also need to acknowledge that the more people that are present, the more risk we are introducing, and for people's own safety and for the board's safety, it is better if they're willing to write us an email or send us a letter.
James, can I speak on that point, please?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So certainly, if something has happened at a previous meeting, people can write an email and express their thoughts about what has happened or what has transpired. I think we need to think about what's going to happen if during the meeting something comes up and we still want public comment. Now, maybe that's just a matter of saying we're going to take all input, or have our meeting and things, then accept some input at that point, maybe at a separate meeting or via email. But I know that in some meetings that we have met, people have heard stuff and then they spoke about it. So that is something I think we should at least think about how to deal with.
Hey.
Go
Hey,
ahead, Betty.
tell her I'd rather be talking to her.
Whoa, Betty, you're not on mute.
Okay, sorry. Go
So-
ahead, Al.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Hal.
Yep. I think what your point is well taken, and I think it's being considered. I won't say counter it, but there is a point where we have to essentially
Cut it.
cut it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you all the way on that.
I mean, if I think James has had the model or brought up the idea of because I want to definitely get credit to him is where one meeting is input or commentary, we have a 2-week period or a period of time after that for additional public comment offline, email, letter, phone call, whatever, and then chance for the board to reply.
Well, email or letter.
Email or letter, yeah, not phone call.
I'm not summarizing comments somebody gives me over the phone.
Okay. Email, letter. And then we have
Yeah, so
that's the board up, but
that's how
go ahead.
Dover has been operating this whole time. For new business, they'll have the first meeting, they'll accept the item as complete, they'll open the public hearing. I haven't been present at a meeting where anybody's actually been present to speak, so we've immediately tabled, wait until the next meeting, whether it's continue to a date and time certain. People can send us letters in the meantime, take up the item of business at the second meeting, then we've gotten our letters, see if anybody else is present to speak, usually they're not, and then the board can act having received comments in writing. So I think for existing business, we don't necessarily need to be that careful because we have had significant input on most of these things. I think for things that we are ready to act on, a final comments from the applicant, open public hearing,
Yeah.
final comments from anybody else who wishes to speak, close it all and act is perfectly acceptable.
James, can we do that all in one meeting?
Yeah, you can. I think that's sort of a case-by-case basis. I think there are some items of business. I don't want to speak for you all in terms of the information that you have, but I think there are some items of business where you could conceivably be ready to act. I think there are some other items of business where I still have some questions or some material that I'm looking for that I don't know is going to be that it's going to be done in one meeting.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
And for some of those, it may depend on when the meeting is and what we can get in before it.
Mhm.
Okay.
So in terms of meeting schedule, we've got 2 definites on the calendar right now, those being July 9th and July 23rd as our regularly scheduled meetings. I would leave it to you all to decide whether you think one or more additional meetings are warranted and or fit your schedule. I think if we want to stick to Thursdays just for simplicity of notice and familiarity, the 16th would be an option. I haven't really looked at the 30th, but I don't see why we can't consider that either now or as we get into July.
Can I ask, James,
Go ahead,
can I
Joe.
ask in regard to what you're suggesting, are there, of any of the current likely candidates for files that are upcoming? There was a list of about 5 on the current agenda, something like that. of those which are most likely to want to be going ahead as soon as possible. Or to put it another way, or that we're in a position, I guess the other would be that we're in a position to just deal with expeditiously. But I'm actually concerned about the first, which are more pressing to move along, both from their standpoint.
So I think the new items of business, I think we've been, these are things that people were hoping to come in before we stopped doing business in April effectively, or the end of March. So I know they have both suggested that their applications are theoretically easy and should be done quickly. I haven't done staff reports for them yet, but I think if we're thinking about stuff for the end of the month, we don't want to, I think, keep kicking the can on new business that we haven't taken in over all this time necessarily either. For things that were on the agenda that Susan sent out, as far as existing things, Joseph Carter, I think, is one where we're still waiting on materials. So I would not say that one is likely to be done soon. So I wouldn't say it's top priority to put on the next meeting. Aroma Joe's, we had essentially put ourselves on the path to have one final meeting with that and then act. And then we had to pump the brakes on meetings. So I would say if there are materials that you all had and might be missing, or didn't have a copy of at home, or you want us to send staff reports back out so you can refresh your memories, let us know. But I do think that is one that theoretically you could do in one more meeting, assuming you're all comfortable getting back up to speed on that one in one more meeting. Millstone, the excavation permit and the site plan to go along with it. I need to dig into that, and I want to give you another staff report once I have. But I think right now, I know that we are expecting that the Conservation Commission will be formally submitting comments. I would be a little bit surprised if that was a single meeting, which isn't to say that it's, less important and should get kicked down the road, but I think that one is likely to need either some clarification of existing materials or another round of edits or something like that before I would suggest approving. But I do want to.
Plus, we would have to have the time. We'd have to have the time to take a look at that conservation response, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think they met either earlier this week or last week. So we haven't received the written up comments yet.
They met last night.
Last night.
Yeah.
It's going to be at least.
So that's something that we'll hopefully be getting very soon. But I think that, that one will need a little bit more time. And to be honest, from a staff standpoint, I can't have an updated staff report of every one of our cases for the same meeting. So in part, I'm thinking about spacing out some of my stuff as well. Granite Street, Victoria, you got a question?
Yeah, I just happened to stumble upon the Conservation Commission meeting last night because it popped up on my YouTube thing and I watched some of it. And they were talking about hydrology issues, but my point is that they had the plan, pages from the plan on the screen, and it was very helpful. And I'm wondering, given the practicalities of having plans sets on the desks and good communication, if it would be possible to show that. I don't know how they did it last night. I don't know if it was one of the Conservation Commission members happened to have
Screen
it, but it was
They
screen
were
sharing.
just,
So
yeah.
I don't, yeah.
They'd
So
have
if
to have
someone was able to
electronic
pull it up,
plans submitted.
Yeah, we have all that in electronic format, so I think we could do it.
yeah, it would be very helpful. Also, is there any way to show some sort of screen? This makes sense. For planning board members to have a screen in the meeting room to look at.
Mhm.
So they wouldn't have to be looking at.
Just need a projector.
Yeah.
We have a projector. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think how
That's why I was
the
troubled.
layout of the room with,
That might be difficult, given the,
yeah, it's,
Yeah,
until I know how it's going to be
yeah,
set up.
sure,
excuse me.
Yeah, I don't know yet. So
sure. Because one of the things it would
Yeah,
do,
so
however it was portrayed, either on Zoom or however, it would be very helpful to members of the public to be able to see the electronic version.
yeah, I think in an ideal world, the sort of multimedia, we can have somebody using their mouse to scroll on the plan that the public can see and the board can see in real time, would be great. I think we just need to figure out whether we have the logistical capabilities to do all of that on one platform and give everybody the ability to see it equally.
Yeah.
But we can definitely look into it and keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Granite Street was the next one that I was going to mention. That one, we had 2 peer reviews that we were, actually technically 3 that we were doing on that one. One was drainage, one was traffic, and both of those went to the town engineer. And then one was going to be review of the easement language for the several stormwater infrastructure placements that the town would need an easement on those if they needed to go in and fix those. So we have gotten the peer review by the engineer back and forwarded it to the applicant. I don't think either Linda or I have heard back from the applicant about comments on that. Susan, you have?
I talked to Mark today about tonight, and
Okay.
he said that they feel like they'd be ready for a meeting at the end of July, so the 23rd. So.
Okay. So what I was going to say is we have not gotten the legal description of the easements to even send those off for review yet. So that was one that I would not have suggested to put on the 9th. If they're more interested in the end of the month, I think that timeline could make a lot more sense. And since the board has already authorized sending those documents over to legal, we might, I don't want to promise anything, but I'm knocking on wood, even be able to send them off and get them back in time for the end of the month. But that depends on when we get them from the applicant.
Personally, I'd encourage us to try to meet every Thursday till we get caught up. I know folks are very anxious to get through this. And we have held up some of these quite a long time, not because of our actions. Obviously, COVID has affected this, but
Thank you.
yeah, there's concerns. So James, the 3 that you think are most likely to happen or be able to be dealt with are Millstone, Aroma Joe's, and Granite Street.
Well, so then there's the last one that's on the agenda, which is cerebral development. And that one, we've been back and forth a couple times with legal, primarily about what we can do with the open space, whether we were allowed to change it, if we could change it, how do we need to go about changing it. So we finally got those questions answered, and similarly, we're about onto a path to wrapping things up, and then we had to hit the brakes on that one. So where that is, we've received a sample deed restriction for the open space. That is with legal for review right now, and I know they have a few questions for things that we might need to work out in that, but we're waiting for sort of the process of make sure we have the escrow in place, then legal can do the formal review, do all of their redlining and comments, and then any changes. I think it seems like the applicant is willing to be fairly flexible to address any of those specific concerns for legal. So I'm hopeful that sort of once we get the paperwork in place and the escrow squared away, that should be a couple quick back and forth. Here are my suggestions. Here's what I've adopted. Okay, looks good, and then we can go. So I think that one could actually be fairly quick. I don't know if that back and forth is feasible for the 9th, but I think it could happen potentially for the 16th. And I don't know if Linda has a different sense about timeline on that, and wants to chime in, but I think if we had a special meeting, that could be one to tackle that night.
Let me ask the question a different way. Which ones are absolutely ready to go? Aroma Joe's and Millstone?
I think, honestly, I don't know that Millstone will be done at the next meeting, but if you are anticipating it taking more than one meeting, you could schedule it sooner so that you're dealing with what we have in front of us, and then we know what our next steps are for a second meeting.
Given that they might take 2 steps, if we can, satisfy that sort of initial itch, so to speak, or scratch that initial itch, so to speak, then maybe Aroma Joe's on the 16th. And, if cerebral development's available already on the 9th, we do, and if we aren't, then we move them and Granite Street maybe to the 23rd.
It sounds like Mr. Board of Selectmen's chair is running the planning board schedule as well. Anyway, not that I disagree.
Well, nobody else was speaking up.
Yes.
The other question that I have for Aroma Joe's, since I think that is one that could be done quickly,
Yeah.
is quorum. It is who is going to be present at the meeting on what night. Because for that case, we have a member who is recusing herself. We've also had significant hearings on it before some current members of the board were members of the board. And so in that case, I would suggest that they also recuse themselves from any final vote if they weren't around for most of the action. That leaves us with basically Bob, Joe, Hal, Victoria, and Betty to be our acting sitting board for that. And we know that Betty isn't going to be available on the 9th.
Or the 30th.
Okay.
Or the 30th.
Okay.
I'm available every Thursday in July.
Okay. Good to know.
Betty, I'm just curious why you suggested the 30th, given that we think Aroma Joe's might be ready to go right away.
I was only because extra meetings had been mentioned.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
She
I
said
wasn't.
she's not available.
She's not
on the
available.
30th, right, Betty?
Oh, not
I am
available.
not available on
Yes.
the 9th or the 30th.
Correct.
Oh, well, that might be a consideration then. Yeah,
So if that's one that we've talked about being mostly standalone, that might be appropriate for our biggest chunk of business at a special meeting on the 16th.
Yeah,
Aroma Joe's.
that makes sense.
Okay.
well, yeah, especially if Betty is not available on the 9th or 30th.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
Because I would feel more comfortable if we had expected a quorum of 5, just in case somebody had something last minute.
Well, and more. decisions.
one of the other factors is that if we know we are expecting comments from Conservation Commission on Millstone, it would be appropriate to me to schedule that one when we know or we can expect to have those comments available to us.
Yeah.
If they only met last night and minutes still need to be approved.
I believe they
If I can
authorized.
interrupt. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
They voted on their letter that's being sent, and it's just a matter of finalizing the format and getting it onto
Okay.
a letter. And they were very concerned that the meeting may be held on July 9th. So they did not wait. They actually had the meeting last night rather than waiting till their July 7th, because they thought that they wanted to give the planning board at least a week prior to July 9th to have the letter in their hands.
Okay. Thank them for me for that.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Do we have, just because it's on the schedule, have we, I believe, Mr. Carter, we are still waiting for a driveway permit?
That was one of the.
That I think was both a drainage and a driveway permit.
Okay, I knew we were waiting for information. I know one of them was driveway. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say this again, just because I like to say it every time we're recorded. We are waiting for the driveway permit at his request. We don't have the authority to require that before acting, but we can accommodate a request by an applicant to wait until he has his paperwork.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
So the way I'm looking at this is strictly for schedule, because we have not dealt with layout of the meeting room, flow of people, number of persons, how to, whole lot of other details.
Right.
Strictly from a scheduling perspective, if given those all those disqualifiers, conditions, whatever you want to condition those conditions, I would suggest that, and I'm suggesting this for discussion, so please comment, that if we are adjusting our July schedule to have a meeting on the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd, that we consider Millstone on the 9th, Aroma Joe's on the 16th, and Granite Street on the 23rd.
Bob,
Go ahead.
would you also consider Cerebral Development if they're ready?
Yes.
on
And
that?
they're one of the ones to fit in either the 16th or the 23rd. I think they looked at the end of the month, I believe. The
only reason I suggested the end of the month was to make sure that we had time for legal to come back.
Exactly.
But we do have the language for you to consider. And if there are changes that you want to see before legal does the final sign off on the individual language, it is also conceivable that you could require approval of the dotted I's, crossed T's, and details of legal language as a condition of approval.
Okay. That's interesting, because what I'm not so much afraid of, but it could be that because we have the draft language, we could move Granite Street to the 9th as well, with the idea of just looking at the language for any potential changes. No.
Cerebral Development, we have the language. Granite Street, we do not have the easement language.
Okay, sorry. So we could do Cerebral on the 9th
Also, okay.
as well.
Hey, excuse me, James. On the easement language, I just want to make sure I understand. We looked at the diagrams, and everybody, I think, was comfortable with what was drawn out in terms of how it was shaped and, where it was located and all that type of stuff. What considerations would the board members have relative to the easement language itself that we wouldn't necessarily defer to the lawyers for?
So I don't want to get into too many of the weeds, but process-wise, in order to put land into conservation, because remember, this was intended to be conserved years back. The mechanism was never executed, and that's what we've been trying to figure out is, we've got the clear intent, so we can enforce that it must be open space, but we need the legal mechanism, whether it's an easement or a deed restriction, to actually be put in place so that we're done and it's legally protected. In order to do that, the applicant is required to sort of choose a valid public purpose for that open space to serve. So you have the ability to consider, one, whether the purpose that they've chosen is valid, but assuming that it is, then whether the provisions that they have in the document meet the public purpose that they say they are intending to meet.
Okay.
So I think there's a difference between the planning board signing off on the concept of what's going into the easement and legal signing off on the form by which it's executed.
Yeah, I got you. Then Bob's suggestion makes real good sense, because then we could understand that and then have time to think about it before the next meeting. And I think that'd make me feel more comfortable.
Okay, so if we set that one for the 9th, worst case scenario, even if you decide you're not comfortable with rendering a decision based on conditions of approval for legal sign off, then you can just reschedule it for a week or two later anyway, and we're no worse off.
Yeah.
It still gives us time to review it.
Yeah. I like that.
Okay.
So when does Granite Street then end up on the schedule? Was that the 23rd, Bob?
That's what I had suggested.
What's your sense as to how much discussion we have there?
I have no idea.
Yeah. I don't-
So, and again, I don't want to speak for you based on what information you have or what questions you may still have. But my impression in terms of materials that still needed to be submitted was that once we received back the peer review of the drainage for the new design, the peer review of the traffic, and got that seal of approval on the easement language, you should have all of the information you need to be able to act on that. So I think that particularly if we're putting that at the end of the month, so we have time to get any sort of rebuttal comments back from the applicant and or have the easement language sent off, that could theoretically be a one meeting case, provided that one meeting comes towards the end of the month, so we have that time up front.
If we do it on the 23rd, we would still have a chance to wrap it up on the 30th if that was still something we needed to take care of. Again, I'm just trying to really push to help these folks along.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is
And
there,
that would
is there
give
a
us
process for, because a lot of the materials we haven't seen in a while, and some like for Granite Street, I was sort of involved and wasn't involved for some of it. So
yeah.
what will be the process in terms of planning board members being able to come to town hall to look at the plans and
Refresh our memory.
yeah.
So I think
That's what we have James for.
Once we get sort of our schedule of marching orders, that would be my next question for you. Obviously we'll need to prioritize getting you information for the stuff that's being heard soonest, so that you can prepare meeting by meeting. But as we go down that list, then my question is, do you need a status update from staff in the form of a new staff report? Do you want all of the old staff reports and plans sent to you electronically? Some of those we might have extra copies at town hall that we could send you a paper copy. I'm not sure we have paper copies of all of them. So if we needed to coordinate one person at a time getting to look at the file, that would be something we could do as long as it complied with whatever other rules Northwood had for people accessing town hall. But I think I'd put it on you you tell us what you need, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that you have the information to make an informed decision.
I know I made a blanket request to get a lot of the materials for a lot of the cases electronically, which I didn't want to put a whole bunch of work on Susan. I'm just I think I've got every possible paper for Aroma Joe's, but
I think Victoria, you're right. I mean, these are important decisions, and we shouldn't just go based on some 3-month-old recollection. Having the documents in front of us and really having a chance to go through them again in detail before we make a decision. Meaning, for me at least, having them well in advance of the meeting, or as far in advance as we can.
Yeah, it would make things more efficient too, actually.
Yeah, my recollection is, I think we've seen everything electronically so far. It might not be too bad for Susan to send them out in sequence, not all at once, but one a week in advance, the next one, and so on and so on. That might, spread out her workload a little bit too.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I know I have a lot of the paper drawings, but I could probably find the electronic too, but just to have it all at once ready would be easier for me, certainly.
There's a lot of comments on, at least on the website.
Yes.
On Aroma Joe's there is,
Yes.
yeah, I was just gonna say, but for Millstone.
Others, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so that we can get on the website. Actually, now that you say that, are the documents, like the drawings, on the website also? I don't recollect.
So
Some
we
of
have
the-
not, for all cases, we have not made a standard policy of putting all materials directly on the website.
Yeah.
I think that
It's a heavy
that may be worth considering for the duration of COVID-19 restrictions on hearings and, for ease of getting the public access to what's in the file in lieu of coming to town hall, in lieu of coming to a meeting. I think that would be worth considering. If we can get electronic submissions from all of the applicants, we can just upload those directly. But I think for something like Granite Street or Millstone, that has not been standard practice to this point.
I know I've seen some stuff on Millstone electronic. Maybe it wasn't everything. Maybe it was just certain of the drawings.
I think we need more staff to accommodate the request.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we're working.
I don't know how we can just keep adding more stuff to the staff who is right at the breaking point unless somebody wants to volunteer to do it. Everything takes time. That's the problem. I'm not, it's not that it isn't a good suggestion, but, we have to prioritize. And I think that should be part of the discussion as well and I think James started to bring that up as far as what do you want from him, what do you want from staff, because we have to be prepared for these meetings once they start. And unless there's, additional people come on board, it's going to be very taxing to try to jump into doing a whole lot more at this point.
Certainly.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking, I obviously did not want to put more work on you guys. You've got enough stress as it is. I'm just
Thank you.
thinking
Agreed.
Well, it isn't even that. It's just that we're very short-staffed. We don't have a building inspector. Susan's doing selectmen's minutes. I mean, everybody's doing a whole lot of other things other than their regular job.
Yeah.
And the reason I've been able
my
to do all of that other stuff is because we haven't been meeting the way we usually do.
Right.
I am terrified of next month.
Right. Once we start having all our work back, then that's what I was saying. But that's not the planning board's concern. That's the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator's concern to have staff to accommodate that. I just, I'm just cautioning not to add anything unless it's really necessary at this point.
Yeah, really critical.
Certainly.
Along those lines, how, is just sending it out electronically?
I could do that. If I have it, if I know what people want and I can find it and break it down and do like one emailing like a week before of each case that we're going to do, that would be easy.
Well,
But
maybe
I need to know exactly what's going on, and I can't get like last minute requests and stuff because I'll just,
you need time.
I'm already forgetting things.
Yeah, we've been through this with the board agenda too. You can't.
Yeah.
I personally would like the drawings, or at least what drawings we have in electronic format in James' latest
Staff report.
spreadsheet and report. I don't think I need all the old ones or anything like that.
I mean, I can even scan some things too. That's
I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do
No.
that either.
If it's not readily, I think to Linda's point, if it's not, when you go to that file and look for it, if you can find, whatever,
because I can do that from here.
yeah. And whatever electronic format you got, that's the latest drawing, the latest thing from James, and in terms of the spreadsheet and the report, I'd be happy.
Okay.
Agreed.
That'd be enough to refresh my memory.
Well, it's just so, it's going to be so critically important that we're prepared once we
Yeah.
start back.
Right.
That's my biggest concern. And we can't wait until the last minute to start the planning, as Susan was saying, as far as, and we've had this happen over and over again, whether it's a packet that has to go out or this or that, and then, you know, the staff would just like to know exactly what the board would like and try to accommodate what you would like and be ready to go when, you know, when we do plan to have these meetings.
Completely understood. And whatever we decide, we got to stick to.
And one thing in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's just that they're all little things, but they can add up to, you know, a half a day, you know, if you have enough of them to do. So that was all. It's not that any one thing is a problem to achieve.
Yeah, well, that's why I was suggesting maybe spread them out, you know, just meeting by meeting. But, you know, you may find it easier as you're going through, you find them all, just, that's fine too.
I could separate the emails too. I can, you know, say this is for this is for that.
Yep, that would be very helpful.
Yes, actually it would.
Is to say, you know, here is case 1810, here is case 1922, or whatever they are, however you want to refer to them. And this sort of goes back to one of the reasons I wanted to have on the minutes the summary of, you know, cases heard at the top tonight of the meeting tonight, because then it's a matter of, you know, if that's saved as a PDF, I can search for you know, Millstone on all the minutes and I'll know that, you know, there's a section that was heard on, I'm going to pick dates at random, you know, these 5 meetings.
Yeah.
I can all pull it up.
I think we were all ready to do that, and then here we are.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I don't say that as a complaint in any way.
I think the last time I heard that, we were sitting in the big room, and that's the
Yes,
last
we
time.
were.
Long time ago.
So, but anyway. Okay, all that being said, I am somewhat hesitant to schedule an in-person or live, or however you want to, non-remote, let's call it that way, meeting in the meeting room for July 9th. Because I don't think it's realistic to have a plan with some of the things that were mentioned at the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday of the modifications needed at the workroom or of the meeting room. I'd be surprised if they're achievable by July 9th. I'd be very pleased if they are, but given requirements for notice and other things to that effect, I'd be hesitant to schedule an in-person meeting for that location.
Well, can I chime in there?
Sure, go ahead, Joe.
Well, since that meeting is likely, as we've currently configured it, and it's possibly the Millstone meeting, and it seems the key item there is going to be this information we're getting from the conservation people. So that's pretty much, unless we have that information before then and are able to discuss it.
We should.
But it still is going to be centered around that, and it may not be that useful to have a in-person kind of meeting at that point. That would be my thought on it. If it's pretty much discussing that information, as opposed to input from the applicant.
Or the public.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Joe.
Right.
We need a practice run. We need to see if it's going to work. You know?
Well, and that's one of the things I'm thinking about as well, is that if we have if the room is ready, but we have already made the decision of having a remote meeting because it fits with the requirements, the information we expect to come in, and et cetera, those kinds of things. I don't have any problem with myself or whoever else wanted to, as long as we do the dry run of a couple board members in the meeting room themselves. You know, that is not a requirement, and I'm certainly not mandating it, but if the room is ready and we want to figure out, you know, do exactly as Victoria says, do the dry run, I'm happy to do so. We can still have our remote meeting from that space with 1, 2, 3, however many members are willing to come in if need be. It would not be necessarily open, and it would necessarily not be open to the public. They would still be on streaming. We would still have public comment through electronic means, that kind of thing.
Bob?
So are you suggesting that we would conduct normal business on those 2 cases via Zoom meeting on the 9th?
I don't know, because I have lots of hesitations, and I know staff has hesitations about that.
I mean, we've expressed our concerns, and part of our concern is just the last word we had from town legal counsel was do not conduct public hearings over Zoom.
Right.
When was this?
Back when we first scheduled a Zoom meeting. That's why we haven't done substantive discussion of applications via Zoom this whole time.
Really?
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, different towns' legal counsels have reacted in different ways, and you have relied on different information, but even, I typically apply the understanding that even if different attorneys are going to tell you different things about something, it's generally not a good idea to contradict your attorney, who's the one who has to get up and defend the recommendation they've made to you.
Right.
So that's been a significant reason for why we've been operating the way we have.
Right.
I guess I knew that. I'd forgotten. How about hybrid meetings? Was there a position on that recently about?
Now, before we change that topic, venture down to hybrid meetings, let me mollify James a little bit in the board. My thought of July 9th being either a dry run or conducting business by Zoom, routine business by Zoom, would be that it would be an intake meeting, July 9th. We're expecting comments from the Conservation Commission. Those could be read into the public record. We don't necessarily have to have board member comment at that point in time. But the idea would be to maybe get our feet wet for, an updated staff report if that's available, conservation comments, the cerebral development easement language, but a meeting where decisions aren't being made, and then reconvene that on the 23rd.
Well, Bob,
where we would be more, hang on, Joe, so 1 second.
Yep.
Would be more likely to have either a live person meeting at that point in time in the meeting space. But again, this is why we're having this discussion and to figure out how we want to tackle it. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, just along my previous remark, I was under the impression that we likely would have this conservation report in hand. That is, well, the staff would have it in hand, and I'm wondering if that could not go out electronically to us, giving us, let's say it shows up in this next week, and so we have or early week, and we have a opportunity to read it. Then we have the opportunity to discuss it a little bit, at least at the July 9th meeting. And since part of this effort here is to expedite things, move them all along a little bit, being able to discuss it sooner than later is, rather than just, you mentioned reading the record, which is fine, but if that's the only thing that happens at that point, then we haven't really discussed it. That means it is put off to another time. I'm just thinking it's just one item that we could very likely get out of the way. I mean, we have with cerebral development essentially a legal configuration that we're going to be giving thought to at that meeting without probably finalizing that, though it's possible, I guess. It just seems to make sense to me that we try to, in the interest of expediting, get the consideration going on whatever the Conservation Commission has to say about this application. If it's available and we've seen it. I mean, if it's
Right.
just the day before, I don't know. Well,
No.
but if it's,
Joe,
I'm quite confident you'll have it this coming week.
Linda, go ahead.
They're thinking they can get this stuff out to us.
mhm.
So I think that's, in my mind, okay. And I guess, Bob, to your point, on the 9th, I guess I'm sort of thinking the more important consideration for me is that both those two cases are less likely, I'm not saying they won't, but they're less likely to have people from the public wanting to be there in person and comment.
Right.
Not that we wouldn't accept it, and not that we don't need to make provisions for that, but judging on past meetings, there has been less on those two up to
Correct.
this point.
And my point with the idea of meeting in some format on July 9th would be to not make final decisions on July 9th, so that we could then, even if it was, I won't say pro forma, but the idea of continuing them on to like the 23rd or the 30th or at a later point in time would give people time to reply and
Yeah.
to provide public comment on those cases through electronic means,
Well,
knowing that we will at least have another opportunity to consider that.
especially if you think both of these are two steps.
So we
So
have-
I think something else that I would bring up, we have for Aroma Joe's been very explicit about submission deadlines when we continue.
Yes.
Whereas, we have not always rigorously enforced for every case the fact that we want materials from applicants 10 days in advance, and then when we want written comments from the public. And due to the volume of stuff on that, we thought it was best to be very clear and explicit about when we want things. I would would suggest that since we are hoping to reduce the amount of traffic in terms of people speaking in person, and we want to encourage people to submit comments in writing, that we should be encouraging those deadlines for all cases. So if an applicant needs to get something new to us with the amount of stuff we've got on our plate, if we need new materials to send out to the board, we need them to be in staff's hands 10 days out so that we can put them on the website if the public needs to see them, or get them emailed over to you so you have at least a week to look at them. For members of the public, then we would need their written comments. I think we normally say by close of business on the Tuesday for a Thursday meeting. If it gets to us in writing after that, we can't guarantee that that staff will have had time to see it, put it in the file, forward it on, and every board member will have read it. So I think that, yeah, I don't know, if just me saying so now is enough to say, yes, it will explicitly be so, or if you want to include it in your motions when we eventually get to putting these cases on nights. But I do think that that's going to be important for clarity of information and for giving us all the time to review everybody's and consider everybody's input.
Yes, that makes sense.
Certainly.
Bob,
Go ahead.
you know, James, in my mind, that's actually an important enough factor that I would even ask the board to consider that as a separate motion, that we do that for all cases, just so we start getting in a regular routine. And, you know, just as Joe said too, you know, give us reasonable amount of time to review this stuff as opposed to just dropping it on us, you know, a day in advance.
I think it's been a sliding scale of significance.
Yeah, it's true.
In that, you know, we make I can remember multiple cases where it's been, you know, a change of a sentence or a clause in a sentence that did not significantly, it clarified the intent as opposed to changing the meeting. And those we've have had allowed sooner than within the strict 10 days.
Yeah.
But I agree, there are certainly times where, you know, especially for public comment of cases of interest, significant interest to them, where, you know, we need to have a deadline.
Yeah.
Or stick to the deadline. We have one, but okay.
Just to say, Bob.
Go ahead, Joe.
It hasn't. My understanding was, and this has come up a few times, but this whole corona scenario has mitigated some of these requirements and allowed people. I don't know if they're automatic extensions, but a standard of extensions will be provided, not quite according to the typical rule. I mean, that's what we've been following, I understand, and I suppose any and all other boards and agencies and commissions all around the state. But I'm just, hasn't that been what we've been operating under, in a matter of speaking?
Correct. Executive or emergency order, I think it's 23, included, it had a bunch of provisions for how government needed to operate, in part because a lot of town meetings were affected by the problems in March. But one of the provisions in it was essentially a blanket exemption for government from standard timelines, whether they were in the RSAs, whether they were things that may be in our town charter, because I think some communities were technically having to reschedule their town meeting like every 2 weeks.
Right.
So, and included in that, it explicitly calls out planning board application deadline. So we, for example, have not had to act on completeness on the 2 new applications that we're aware of within 30 days of when they wanted to file, because we have that provision in place. We were legally allowed to say we're not taking new cases right now because our meeting logistics aren't allowing us to act on them. So in part, that's why I'm encouraging you to get to that new business too. I know we've got a lot of old stuff on our plate, but we have other new things that are old business at this point.
James, excuse me, you said new business. What are you referring to there? Are there a couple of items?
So we have 2, I'm aware of 2 applications that you have not seen yet. We've got an application that is technically a subdivision, but it's to condoize a piece of property, and we've got a boundary line adjustment application as well that those would have been filed for the April 1st deadline. And because the end of March was such an unknown as to how we were going to handle things, we had not accepted new applications. So as we've been moving the cases you have seen in open hearings on, we've also been holding off on acting on completeness for those, which is normally a 30-day timeline. We would have had to do it by the end of April. And then once you accept it complete, you've got the statutory 65 days in which to render a decision. So, you know, if you assumed 95 days from the end of April, that's April, May, June, we would be coming up on that 65-day deadline if things had been under normal circumstances. We had the statutory exemption that allowed us to do that, but in the interest of customer service and moving people along, we do need to circle back to those things as well.
Those 2 need to be woven into this tentative schedule that we've configured here?
So they do.
Or can they be pushed off?
So I was suggesting that new business for the end of July meeting, I think it was the 23rd. Which would give us time to meet notice. I think it's been long enough since those materials have been dropped off that we want to make sure, we want to go back through them to make sure we did receive everything, however they were submitted. As far as materials go, I think we may also want to give the abutters list a once over at this point. I think technically those are supposed to be reviewed no earlier than 5 days before submittal, just in case property changes hands.
Yep.
Okay.
So those are on a notice, legal notice dependent schedule at this point. And we have not noticed them prior to this because we didn't want to notice them for a meeting where we weren't going to have a public hearing and just be stringing along a case before we'd even accepted it as complete. But 2, when we knew that there was a potential for meeting, but we were still waiting on approval for the select board, we didn't want to assume we were going to get that permission for a certain meeting date. So now that we know that we have permission and we think that we're definitely going to be in for the 23rd, I would suggest that we notice them for that night.
This is a time to segue. I didn't want to think, I heard her think that I totally blew her off. Victoria, you mentioned the idea of hybrid meetings.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I did.
Do you
Because
want
they can be helpful.
to?
They're
Oh,
more
definitely.
flexible, but they
Would you
also.
want to explain to people who might not know what they are?
Oh, well, some people in person, some people not in person. And that could be members of the board, also could be members of the public. And so it provides flexibility for board members. But it also, it can complicate a meeting. That's why I was talking earlier about having some sort of electronic screen, or it's just some way to present, information, so everybody could sort of be on the same page. But I realize logistically that can be tricky. Because I don't know how many of us want to be in person or are okay with that. I had said I would, and I'm a little on the fence at this point, and I think that it really depends on what the logistics are. But I would imagine that maybe some of us who don't want to be there. So.
And one of the methods that I've seen of having a hybrid meeting, is essentially to have a Zoom meeting for board members and live stream it for members of the public. It doesn't provide a public input, but and then that can be projected on the wall in the public, in the meeting space where members, if there are multiple members who are in person, and that works to essentially allow input from remote people. But
Bob, are you saying the remote input for public would be via the Zoom meeting?
No, it would be, you wouldn't have in-person public hearing. It would be written comments or emails to staff by a deadline, kinds of things.
Okay.
It is possible to do that.
Oh, it is. I agree. It is possible to do that.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. And I'm not.
I think for the logistics of a hybrid meeting like that, realistically, I think probably the Zoom meeting would be board members only.
Right.
It would be live streamed to the public to be able to see it in real time. But the comments would either need to be in person at the meeting, and we're just looping in additional board members electronically, which we are allowed to under 91A as long as we follow certain procedures anyway. The emergency, we still have that additional emergency flexibility under 91A, but I think even if we had to go back to the strict compliance, that's something we could probably work through if we needed to.
Okay. Huh. So what's next?
So I think we have agreed that we have some things to work on with John and Bob and whoever in town hall is responsible for building access and procedures. We have a tentative schedule of what cases will be heard when, and we are uncertain as to whether that schedule will allow for an in-person meeting on July 9th. So I think there was also a tentative suggestion of a meeting at which 2 cases will be heard with the intent of getting up to speed, but not finalizing decisions. Meaning that even if no public input is taken at that meeting, the intent is to keep the public hearing open and schedule it for another meeting, be it the 16th, the 23rd, the 30th, or any time thereafter, to actually act on those two items. So if there's further discussion about any of that, I think we can keep down that road. Otherwise, if we're ready to set that schedule and or make a motion to be explicit about those submittal deadlines for all cases until further notice, I think you can make that motion and or start calling those cases and move to put them on a particular agenda.
Okay. One thing I want to ask or clear with the board ahead of time is the board, well, do I as chair already have the authority to work with John and town staff to arrange the room to facilitate the meeting, or is that something that I need authorization for?
I don't think you need authorization for room setup.
I didn't think so either, but I wanted to double check.
And I think the operation of town hall, we're not talking about changes to the board's operating procedures so much as the operation of an official town facility. So if the select board has authorized John to finalize details, or if we need to work with John to get details finalized and then get them stamped by the select board, I think that is a town administrative function with the town admin and the Board of Selectmen. That's not something that we need to formally approve, in my opinion.
I agree with that, but I want to double check.
So Bob, I mean, when we talked about this at the select board meeting, I think the intent was there's going to be some general guidelines that the town administrator sets in consultation with Bob Young and others. And then I think it was the intent that each individual committee may have, you know, certain things that they will do to satisfy their particular committee needs, you know, so like Ginger Dole may need different considerations given the size of her board than you would with the size of your board in terms of seating arrangements if everybody wanted to be there and stuff. But you may have more considerations regarding public input.
Exactly.
Yeah, so but I think that's the intent, is you have to work those out with them and make
sure
that's what you need.
Right. Agreed. Just bringing it to the board's attention that, you know, it's something I will be doing.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Oh yeah, you have to, but if I'll do it as chair, and I'll take that.
I think the chair working with town staff and town administrative officials is consistent with how other communities have done this as well.
Okay.
It was not, nobody asked me for my opinion as a lowly ZBA alternate in Dover. Staff told us how it was going to work, and we did it.
Okay.
Besides, Bob, we have faith in you.
Thank you.
If you'd like some help, I'd be glad to offer, but I don't want to complicate things.
I'll keep that in mind, that I figure I will keep the board informed.
Okay.
Or staff will keep the board informed. However, somebody will.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'll make a motion, Bob, to satisfy James's suggestion that we proceed with a schedule of meetings starting July 9th, 16th, and 23rd. The first meeting to deal with the Millstone application and the...
Joe, before you finish the motion. I would
Yep.
still suggest, since the cases are different items of business on the agenda, that you still call each
Yeah.
case
Well,
individually.
One individual.
All right.
If you want to make a motion about the submittal deadline separately, I think that makes sense right now. Otherwise, Bob,
All
I
right.
suggest
Yep.
call case, whatever,
Yeah, we call it
Millstone
case, right.
Realty Trust,
Okay.
then a motion,
Yeah,
call the next case, then a motion.
yeah, okay. Sounds good.
Yep, okay. So what I'm thinking of for submittal deadlines, we do have 10 days for cases, and that would be essentially for any meeting on July 9th. We're talking 10 business days or 10 calendar days?
10 calendar days.
Okay.
So the way we had done that explicitly was Monday, 10 days out.
10 days out would
So
be,
for the
yeah,
9th,
Monday
it
the
would be
29th.
Monday the 29th, close of business.
Right.
Which for us is 4 p.m.
Okay,
And then submittal by the public the Tuesday immediately preceding, so the 7th, close of business for the meeting on the 9th.
okay.
So this motion needs to refer to submittal deadlines for these two specific applications, Millstone Realty and,
Submittal deadlines for all applications.
I think we could easily say it
Um,
is submittal deadlines from the applicant and associated parties. We use that language for 10 days prior to meeting, and comments from the public for the Tuesday before the meeting. Would that make sense for language?
So moved.
and with a specific
Yeah,
reference to,
Hang on. You
Yeah.
don't have to move it yet. But go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
but with
I
a
think that
specific,
language,
go ahead.
who is to go ahead, me or Joe?
James has it.
James.
Go ahead.
I think that specific language makes sense. I think we have talked about examples of how we would interpret it. So I think so moved along that language is clear at this point, and it's explicit how to apply that to every case based on when the meeting date is.
Right.
Okay. So Betty made the motion. Joe, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Kreider, or Hal Kreider. Joe, do you have more comments, or?
Well, no, and then the second part of that is going to make us, as I understand, James, to make a separate motion to accomplish the same thing for cerebral development.
Well, I think where I'm going to go and where you can come in is when I call the case, we'll do a continuance for
Okay,
that.
all right,
So,
all right.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, because it seems like we have a couple different ideas about what. So this motion is for a standard practice of submittal deadlines that we will apply to every case that we have open right now, and to new cases as they come in if they have to resubmit materials. And then we will separately start to call the individual cases to put them on a schedule, either similar to what we discussed before or change it as necessary as those motions are made.
Okay.
So is
my
everybody
motion-
clear with this? motion?
well, we got a motion on the floor already.
My motion is James made it clear.
Hang on, Joe. We got one on the floor already by Betty.
Oh. Oh, I thought that was okay.
She beat you. So moved is faster to spit out. And just for my clarification for that, when I refer to associated parties, the idea of the 10 days is that that would be information from the applicant, the town engineer,
Legal.
similar parties associated with the applicant
Right.
or the town.
That
or
would be
the
my
applicant.
understand.
Yeah, as long as we understand that
So-
that's who we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say if something came in after that deadline, I'm not going to refuse to talk to somebody or look at their stuff. But the point being, if it's after that deadline, the board is not obligated to consider it or act on it at that meeting. And nobody can blame you for that because
Exactly.
you need time to look it over.
Okay, so motion by Ms. Betty Smith, second by Mr. Hal Kreider. Further discussion on the 10-day and Tuesday deadlines for submittals.
Is it clear that it's close of business those days, Bob?
4 p.m.
Yeah, set a time. That way it's clear.
Okay.
Close of business.
Close the business for Northwood Town Office, which is 4 p.m.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Further
Sounds
discussion?
good.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please. Susan, actually, you want to do it because it'll be easier for you to write it down.
Sure. Victoria,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. And I have to admit, I like that language, 10 days and Tuesdays.
Wow.
Easy to remember.
You could write a song.
No, I'm not going to write a song. That's your job, Mr. Town of 11 Lakes.
Yes.
Okay, alliteration is a good thing. It's not often we get poetry in planning board.
That's
So that being said, let me pull up the agenda and I will start calling cases. First case is 18-13 and 19-20, Millstone Realty Trust and Ledgewood Realty Trust. The discussion we've had on this was to continue this to July 9th. And I would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Betty Smith, second by Ms. Victoria Parmalee to continue 18-13 and 19-20 to July 9th. Discussion. Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Victoria,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. Okay. So 18-13 and 19-20 are continued to July 9th. Calling the next case, 18-20, 68. Yeah, let me wait on that. Let me do them in different order. They're all continued cases. I'm gonna go by date. Next case is 19-17, Cerebral Development LLC, Chris Myers. And we talked about continuing this also to July 9th. And I would entertain a motion to that effect.
Motion to do so.
You have a second?
July
Okay,
9th.
motion by Mr. McCaffrey, second by Mr. Kreider. Discussion on the continuance. Hearing none, a roll call vote, please.
Victoria,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. And aside from myself, we should rotate or change the order of name calls as we go do a roll call vote.
This is how I have them written down.
Okay, I know that.
Start with the next one down and so on.
You're
You're
just,
just gonna confuse me.
start with the next person in line. It's fine.
Okay,
There's
Flip
no
back.
need for that.
We'll keep track of it for you, Susan.
okay.
Okay. I
What's
gotta
the
make my
reason
own
for
notes.
that? Oh, never mind. Never mind.
I don't know.
Okay. We are looking at an additional meeting in July on the 16th. Just to be clear. And let me call case 19-12, Michael Sullivan, Aroma Joe's. And
Recused.
Pardon me?
I'm recused.
Okay, so Lee Baldwin has recused herself, and the voting designation reflects that change. Lee, would you mind muting yourself for that time?
Hang on.
Yep. Not absolutely necessary, but it's being recorded and live streamed that way. It's easy. I guess that's equivalent to removing yourself from the table. We can't hear her. Okay, I would entertain a motion to continue Michael Sullivan, Aroma Joe's to July 16th.
Motion to continue.
Okay, at 7 p.m. I believe that was Betty who gave the motion.
Yep.
Okay, Joe was a second.
Yes.
Okay, actually I should be proper and give everybody else the respect. Ms. Betty Smith made the motion and Mr. Joe McCaffrey made the second. Discussion on continuance of 19-12. Hearing none, a roll call vote, please.
Eddie,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Victoria,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. Okay. Next up
Lee can come back.
is Lee. You can unmute yourself if you want to join us.
I'm back.
Thank you, and Ms. And is added to the voting designation. Next up is July 23rd is our planned regular meeting date. And we have on that, as discussed, Granite Street, 60, so I'll call case 18-20, 68 Granite Street Properties LLC. And I would entertain a motion to continue to July 23rd.
So
So
moved.
moved.
We'll give it to Mr. McCaffrey tonight. Betty, do you want to be second?
That's fine.
Okay, motion by Mr. McCaffrey, second by Ms. Betty Smith. Discussion on case 18-20 68 Granite Street Properties.
This is again for 7 o'clock.
Yes, our regular scheduled meeting. Oh, actually, that's a good point.
6:30.
We usually do 6:30 if we're in person.
That was part of the reason I asked, because I know somebody explicitly said 7 on one of the previous ones.
I did on July 16th.
Let's do 7. It'll be cooler.
It'll be later as well.
I know. I'm worried about hot
That's okay.
weather in that room.
Yeah, but we are doing fewer during each meeting, so maybe the lateness isn't as big a factor for us.
What time do you get up in the morning, Hal? I'm up at 4:30.
I'm still sleeping at that point in time.
I think most normal people are.
Yeah. Well, whatever,
Okay, well, let's not discuss personal peccadillos. Let's do 7 o'clock. I'm okay with 7 o'clock.
Okay, we're doing 7 on all of the ones that we did so far then?
For the month of July, let's figure on 7 p.m.
Okay.
for in-person, for meetings in whatever
Okay.
format they end up being.
Great. Thank you.
So for all of
Am I
July.
good point and good catch.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion for 68 Granite Street to July 23rd at 7 PM by Joe and Betty, I think.
There you go.
Okay. Discussion? Hearing none, a roll call vote, please.
Lee,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Victoria,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. Okay, so the next case is Joseph Carter Fatherland Family Trust 19-6. And I believe we're waiting on 2 pieces of information for that. The drainage and the driveway permit is by my recollection.
Yeah, as with all of these, I'm going to want to take a look back through the file on that one and the minutes on that one to make sure we know exactly what we're waiting on from who and where it's going.
Okay.
But I know for a fact we're waiting on the driveway permit, and I have not seen that come in.
Okay.
I believe there was also drainage in some capacity that we were waiting for revisions of some sort.
Right.
Okay. So the way I'm feeling right now is that we consider continuing this to the 23rd, figuring that we may or may not have new information to operate off of. But that we only have, currently we have Granite Street on that evening.
What about
So moved.
what about the second meeting for Millstone? They're most
I
likely.
think we'll handle that on after the first one, after July 9th.
So what day would that be? The
Yeah.
Oh, but
23rd?
that might be the 23rd. It might be in August.
Okay.
And I believe, do we need to continue to the same month, or we can continue to August, in theory. For Father Carter Trust, or for Carter.
In theory, you can continue it to whenever.
Yeah.
I'm
just
I
wondering.
think it's a matter of whether you want to put it that far out, not knowing what our meeting environment is going to be like, or or whether there's a potential for special meetings in August as well.
Right. Well, what I'm thinking is the work session in August. But I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts or preference?
Well, maybe we better wait until we see how a couple of these go, and let's see how the meeting room stuff gels. Because we may need to continue to spread these out, and then we got the new ones.
Right.
Maybe even a meeting on the 30th might be warranted if we want to get to some of these new ones.
So I think there are sort of 2 possibilities: that either we will have received things and we will be ready to talk about this case,
Right.
or we won't have received them and we will be hunting again.
Right.
I wouldn't want to necessarily suggest that you push it too far out, not knowing when those things are going to come in. But I also haven't heard from Mr. Carter in a while about, the status of things he's working on with other entities. Susan, were you able to get in touch with him?
My recollection is he was going to do some stuff on the drainage, but only after he knew what was going to happen with the driveway permit. So my thinking is this is keep pushing out, because if you don't have the driveway permit by now, you'll still have to do the drainage code.
Or what, we're waiting from DOT for the driveway permit?
Well, we're not, he is.
Well, right, but
He didn't want to proceed any further or invest any more money in drainage calcs, and my understanding, didn't want to do that. And, you know, that's certainly his prerogative. So, you know, even once we get the driveway permit, or we know that it's, you know, ready, he still may need some time to pull his drainage calculations together.
Right. Well, what I'm thinking offhand is to schedule this for the 9th.
Oh,
And then,
Oh,
because we have a relatively, I won't say late schedule, but we don't have a significant schedule. If we can say we've touched it in July. And if we want to schedule it for the 30th, we could do it for the 30th, we get something in, or
some of the other, depending, yeah.
So if we put it on July, we can reach out to Mr. Carter, get his preference or get his sense of timeline. And if we need to push it out longer, we'll have an opportunity real soon to do it.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will call case 19-6, Joseph Carter, Fatherland Family Trust. And the intent under the emergency order is to continue this case to July 9th. And would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so motion by Ms. Betty Smith, and I believe that was a second by Ms. Lee Baldwin.
Yes.
Discussion? Hearing none. All roll call vote, please.
Betty,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes,
Victoria,
yes.
Bob.
Yes. Okay,
May I interrupt for just a moment?
certainly.
I just want to put this out there only because I don't know if this gentleman may be listening on YouTube, but one of the folks has been waiting quite a long time for their application to go forward. Sent me an email not too long ago asking, and I know that the planning board can't answer this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Whether or not it might be a feasible option to have outdoor meetings. And I just wanted to get that on the record. I think he was probably listening to the meeting tonight and hearing
Yes,
how the board is.
He's on, he's chatted. And I did, during well, let's say I put the other half of my brain on to Google. There are some towns in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire who are looking at having outdoor meetings, town meetings in specific. I can pull it up. Oh, I closed it already, sorry. One of them was west, I believe is North Andover, near Salem. And there's another one in Massachusetts that's doing town meeting outdoors. I think it's a good idea. The problem I find with it is because of our planning board's tradition of meeting in evenings. That could be, well.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
We do.
Dark out, yeah.
It's dark, it's mosquito bait. And I would rather not put myself through that. I think though, if we had a case of townwide interest, and could not accommodate the number of people we've had, like we've had in prior meetings, I do think we could consider an outdoor meeting. I'm thinking of a location in specific, but I don't need to name it for this case, because it would not apply. And I think we've accommodated, or at least conveyed to the public our intention that, and request, and I'll state it again, that if members of the public have a comment on a case before the planning board, please seriously consider putting in writing, sending an email to town staff, dropping something at town hall, or putting in the mail. We will certainly consider it. Okay.
Eric would put it in the, do those things before the close of business on the Tuesday.
Yes, the close of Tuesday before the meeting that is scheduled for. Or then you will not hear it unless the meeting, that application is continued. Okay, I think I covered all the cases that we have for continued for tonight. So I'll move on, and hopefully Nick Termel has that at least satisfied his consideration for a little bit. Thank you for bringing that to my attention again, Linda. I am going to share my screen so you can see this, and I will go over some of it ahead of time.
So, Bob, just to be clear, I don't think we need a motion, but everybody under the same understanding that we are noticing the new business for the 23rd?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that we have at least one continued case for that night. And if, depending on exactly how we work out the meeting flow and details, we might still be on the no new business by either 9 o'clock or 9:30, whatever time frame it is for that night. Okay, are you seeing a multicolored spreadsheet?
Yes.
Possibly exception of Joe. I don't know if you're on your phone.
No, I see it.
Okay. I did email this out earlier. And what I wanted to go over, the main things that you'll see, colors are going across the top are department. The old CIP projects are in this font of not bold and italic. So for instance, at the top, the library, the last year's CIP projects where they replaced the HVAC and replaced the front door. This year's project, standby generator and solar array, the year, the funding mechanism, how many years of funding they're looking at, the expected life if they gave it. You'll notice the asterisk essentially means that I made a guess. And then we get into some changes that I made from last CIP plan, in that these columns are the year and the request. So last year's costs, if I didn't tally it up right, I'm sorry. Well, don't look too much at the value here for 2020, because I think I might have done some problems for the fire department. But if you look at 2021, 2022, 3, 4, 5, and 6, these are the total requests for that year for projects that have come in so far. And if you had any question about the value of the CIP, you can see it see the task ahead in these figures in yellow, in that the first three, they're not too far out of whack or out of alignment from each other. But then in 2025, the school board is looking at replacing the roof of the school, and we get a massive $340,000 hit that year. So what would end up happening if we just did straight funding would be potentially a nice tax increase. The idea of the CIP is to figure out, okay, what mechanisms can we and adjustments can we make to spread out that hit so that these dollar figures are fairly even. That being said, that's the basic goal of this. We did not get an awful lot of, let's call them the heavy hitters, for projects this year. For instance, fire and rescue, I was still working on that, but the working through, we did not get a single request from fire. That being said, I think we have a new fire chief, I believe. So, but the items that are in a different font, like replace ambulance, replace radios, replace the tanker, replace the thermal imagers, those are items that were passed by warrant article this past year. I have yet to incorporate them into the financial plan or layout, but I at least wanted to call attention to them. That's as far as I got. We did get some new projects from the NES, the Northwood Elementary School. Again, the items in bold are projects proposed for this year. And some nice sized ones, like for instance, air conditioning in 2022, a boiler replacement in 2023, and again, as I mentioned, the roof in 2025. And when I say nice, I don't mean them in terms of quality, because we don't decide whether a project goes ahead. We just try to figure out how to fund it. That's where we're at. I appreciate Linda's efforts in getting all that information together. That being said, I think I need maybe the Board of Selectmen would like to talk to the fire department to ask them if they have any plans that need to be brought up for the CIP.
I can take that task.
Okay.
Is it just the fire department?
Highway.
Highway as well. And if transfer station has anything, they usually don't, but I did not get a response from highway, and I did not get a response from fire.
I think the transfer station might have some ideas.
Okay, they might.
Okay, but those are the three main ones?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless there's additional work from town hall or recreation.
You know what? Okay. We'll push on that a little bit.
Okay, that'd be good.
If I could just have a request of you, or at least for you to consider and the rest of the board, the point you made earlier about here's the value of the CIP, the stuff isn't spread out and stuff. Would you consider publishing two versions of this? The one which is just your raw input, so to speak, and then the second one, which is after you've worked through trying to adjust and spread things out or look at different funding mechanisms?
I don't know if I would do that, but what I would do is comparison. I hit it on what I send you. This is the adjusted plan for the financial plan, so you can get a comparison.
Okay.
So theoretically,
yeah, same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Ideally, you could say, here are the requests for 2021, and here is the CIP plan on how to pay for it adjusted.
Gotcha.
On the same spreadsheet.
Okay, that's it. That's even better, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
To
James,
clarify, Bob, can I
Yep.
ask, when you phrase it, this is the plan as how to pay for it. What I think you've explained in the past or referred to is that what you are doing here is might say suggested or reasonable estimation of a way to spread out especially high dollar costs as they work against other large requests in projected budgets. That is, it's not so much, what I'm thinking about is you're not doing an arbitrary scenario here, but you're making an attempt to balance costs so that on future budgets going through the next 5 or 10 years or whatever, to spread out these large costs. And
correct.
you're simply, as I get it, you're going through a process of dividing them into more reasonable bites and then seeing to it that they don't all show up in the same year.
Correct. That's one mechanism, a mechanism to say, if we know, for instance, in 5 years, we got $340,000 going under the school roof, and that same year we get another hit for, whatever, let's say a paving project for some road. It can be a matter of, as an option, setting up a capital reserve fund or funding a capital reserve fund for the paving project, or vice versa, for the school to say, yes, this year, please put in, $75,000 or whatever, some dollar figure, for the prior 3 years to fund the new roof. And then, but that takes some work on both the school board side and on my side to be able to say, please consider, because we as CIP and planning board don't have authorization to create the capital reserve fund or fund it. We can only suggest to the school board, this is how we would like you to do it, or suggest how you do it. That's why it's planning board as opposed to someone else doing the CIP.
Sure, I understood that. I think.
But yes, that is the idea.
You're going through the process right now, or have, to divide some of these larger numbers up. If the given department hasn't already, you're going through a process of dividing up some of these numbers so they play in a balanced way over a scenario of whatever 5 years, but so that each year looks balanced as
correct
as much as possible compared to any other year, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So that instead of having to come up with an additional, $750,000 or something, some dollar, whatever figure you want to use to fund 2 expensive projects that are proposed in the same year, one for the school board and one for town hall, for instance. These are totally made up projects. I would go back to both the proposers to say, what is the possibility of moving one to a different year, and make a suggestion that, yes, please push it. Can you push it off for 1 year? We might get a pushback to say no. For instance, it's like the analogy I use is for house maintenance. There are some projects that when your furnace is 20 years old and it's September, you may want to consider not putting it off going into winter when you know that there's a good chance it's going to die fairly soon. We don't know what the time frame is on that death, but the cost of incidental damage of a furnace going out in December is much greater than if your furnace goes out in July. Same thing with the roof. You can push off a roof maybe for 20 to 25 years, depending on a whole bunch of things. But as you get closer to that end of life, the changes are different. If you have the money or can set aside the money at starting at year 20 and save up for a roof for 5 years and definitely do it in the 25th year because you've saved up the cash, that's the idea that I'm floating now with the CIP.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thanks.
And it's a matter of going to the departments and saying, how much flexibility is there on this? For instance, when I talked to the fire chief last year, the personal breathers, they are a matter of those items were losing certification at the end of that year. So there was no flexibility unless we wanted to have our volunteers using uncertified equipment, which then puts us at risk of liability. So there was no flexibility in that kind of decision. There is flexibility on the kind of thing of, do we need a new tanker? Can we get another year out of it because it would make the finances work a little better? Possibly. It's like a used car, same kind of analogy. But that's the idea that I'm moving.
Yeah,
toward.
I was really having you reiterate that in part for, and I don't know that there are many listening to this. I guess we're in some fashion a public cast right now, but still for those that want to have a overview of, it isn't that you haven't said some of this before, but it's just, I think, good to keep reiterating what this is all about.
Exactly. But I'll take your comments, Hal, into suggestion is to have either a side-by-side comparison or the requests and the adjustments available. I'm still trying to work out how I want to include prior projects for the CIP, that it's so that it doesn't, it's quite information dense currently.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I'm already up to when I get hard copies, I need 11 by 17, 2 pieces of paper for it. So.
I think you made a good point. If you don't spread them out, you can affect the tax rate. And I think that's a good point to make if you can.
Well, I think as well, the value I see in the CIP, and I don't think it's been stressed enough, is that it's a record of what is planned for upcoming purchases.
Right.
Well, we are, as a town and the state in general, for most towns who operate, the budget committee purview is the current year. And the Board of Selectmen is the current year, and that they ask the town departments, what projects do you have for this year? How are we going to fund it? Do we put it in the budget? Do we put it in the warrant article? Blah, blah, et cetera, those details. But we don't talk about, well, next year we've got something big that we've got to consider. That is the purpose of this. We now know that the school board is on record to say in 2025, they're looking at a new roof. So we can then make adjustments in our other projects through this process to be able to say, wait a second, we're going to get a massive or a hit of this dollar figure this year. Let's not plan an expensive project so that our residents aren't hit with something massive or an increase in tax rate. Okay, I think I've stated that enough, and it's also closing in on 9:30. But what I will do now that I have those, if our select board rep can request of the couple extra departments, if they have anything, even if it's just a matter of saying, yeah, I'll get you something by, whatever, July 15th or sometime in the next couple weeks, that would be lovely. So I know to expect them. Yeah. If they have nothing, that's also fine. Just a yes or no, or I have something coming, or a no is fine. But then what I'll do is I'll start working on that projection and funding mechanisms.
Okay, so Bob, the other question in my mind, and you mentioned it, you mentioned the budget committee. They do like to look at this, and we want to make sure we include this in our budgeting process. And,
Exactly.
and like you said, certainly for projects that are coming due on the 2021, we need to start thinking about how to get those on warrant articles if necessary and stuff like that. So my question is this, what's the schedule for the planning board to ultimately get to the approval of this so that it can be formally transmitted to the select board?
I believe the idea, and James's off audio, is to have.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back? Because you're good at keeping track of it. I believe the plan is to have it in September.
We discussed having a formal draft for public comment in August.
Okay.
Okay.
So that we would be able to at least say, this is what we're thinking. And if people didn't like the way you broke it up or pushed things out or had anything else they wanted to share with us, they'd have at least a couple weeks to do it. And then we would formally adopt in September.
Okay, good.
And one of the recommendations that I've included in that is where appropriate, or where I think is appropriate, or planning board thinks is appropriate, is items like a capital reserve fund, or something that takes longer term establishment. And that would be in there. So for instance, if we suggested to the school board, yes, please consider funding, 70 statement or a dollar figure each year for 3 years. That would be on the plan so that as Board of Selectmen and the school board go into the fall warrant article set drafting time frame, they would know that if we want to follow the CIP, we need to consider, establishing a capital reserve fund or funding it or something to that effect, rather than at the last minute. I know that's what has happened in the past. Is warrant articles were written without suggestions from following the suggestions of the CIP because of the time frame. So, but hopefully we're getting better at it.
Well, especially if you can get it approved by
Get it out earlier.
Yeah.
You're given more notice. So, okay. Any questions? Anything further comments on the CIP?
No, really appreciate you doing this, Bob. Thank you.
It's a lot of work.
It's something I've been doing for years. So I'm fine with it. I'm used to large spreadsheets. This is not the largest by far, but that's okay. It is pretty good sized. Anything further for tonight? Okay, just as a reminder, we have meetings in July on the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd. Just an extra one.
And I am not able to be there on the 9th, or
Correct.
if we have one on the 30th.
Correct. So Betty's already on notice of being out on the 9th, which is fine. Otherwise, I would entertain a final motion for the night.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Betty Smith, second by Ms. Lee Baldwin, to adjourn at 9:30. Discussion? Hearing none. Have a happy 4th of July.
Thank you, everybody.
And a good evening.
Likewise.
Thank you all for participating.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Night all.
Night.